Recently, I had a very interesting experience with a video on my main channel that I thought would be fun to talk about. I figured for those of you who don't know all that much about what goes into putting videos out, it might be cool to get a peek behind the screen. And also for those of you who do make videos, it might be a helpful reminder of some things you can possibly do to hopefully get your good work seen by as many people as possible. So yeah, about a week and a half ago, I put out a video on time limits with the thumbnail and title of "Time Limits Are Good Actually." In certain regards, I think the video did pretty well. It generated some of the most comments I've gotten on a video, which I love. I love when I can spark conversation, whether they agree with me or disagree. And what I'll say is this is a video on a very contentious topic, and people were at least from what I saw, there's a lot of comments, so maybe I missed people being mean. But for the most part, it was people who are passionate about game design sharing their takes, whether they agreed with me or disagreed with me. Many disagreed with me, but it was cool. People were respectful and sharing their stuff, which is great. It's what you want. However, that increase in conversation didn't necessarily move to an increase in views. Pretty quickly, the video started slowing down to be a dreaded 10 of 10, which means of my last 10 videos, it is the worst performing. And that is what it is. Not every video is going to do amazing. You have highs and lows, and that's kind of how this whole thing works. It did feel like it was getting a little bit less traction than I would expect a video like this to get. As I almost always do, I commissioned Hot Cider, also known as James, to make the thumbnail. If you don't know Hot Cider, you've definitely seen his work if you watch any of my videos. Pretty much 99.9% of the thumbs on my main channel are made by him. A lot on this channel have been made by him. So you've seen his work, if not from me, probably from Jacob Geller, and everyone. Like he does so many thumbnails because he is just the best at what he does. So we worked on this and got to this thumbnail of the Majora's Mask clock tower with the text, "Time limits are good actually." I did have a variation of this of just "time limits are good" because I was a little worried that the "actually" made people mad, which I can get into a bit later. But that was what it was. And I largely like this. I think it's a strong declarative statement similar to some of my older videos like "I hate fast travel" and "Minimaps are stupid," where it is a take that is probably somewhat unpopular and a strong position on that take. The strategy here was it is a strong opinion that people will be compelled to click on, probably to disagree, and then so they'll be hooked by this strong moment and hopefully pulled in and stay there for the nuance I provide and the self-awareness I provide. And you know, when people clicked the video, I do think that was the case. The retention was pretty high, and as I said before, there were lots and lots of comments and conversation happening. The thing is, it wasn't getting those clicks I maybe expected it to. It was a lower click-through rate than my average videos, and it seemed like people saw the title and were like, I already know everything I need to know. I don't like time limits, so I'm not going to watch this. Of course, I think there were plenty of people who did, but it wasn't the strong pull that I maybe thought it was. Now, admittedly, I think one of my mistakes, or really I made two mistakes that probably led to this. I mean, I think it was a fair decision to pick this idea for a thumbnail because it has worked for me before. But my two mistakes going into this is, one, I didn't have a super clear idea of what I wanted for the thumbnail before reaching out to James. And the second is I was pretty focused on just working on the video that I lost track of the fact that I hadn't reached out to James yet. So it was pretty close to the deadline, which certainly created a level of stress that didn't need to be there. Ironic for a video on time limits. While you can get away with not necessarily knowing what you want in a thumbnail before starting to work on it, and you can get away with being close to the deadline before putting out a video, it's hard to get both of those together because if you don't really know what you want, you need time to sit on an idea, look at it for a while, check back on it the next day and be like, yeah, this makes sense for these logical reasons. And I kind of missed that step because of my own stupidity. Thankfully, James came up with a ton of different ideas to experiment with. He sent a few different concepts that were separate from this Majora's Mask one that I was able to take elements of to make a new thumbnail. As the video talks about games that I wish had timers, the thought was maybe to use some of those in it with some clear time symbol, which is the clock from 12 minutes. I was a little back and forth on this, as I was worried that it might be confusing, especially when you click the video and you don't necessarily see those games right away. But I think they were visually compelling. And especially, I really liked the clock overlay. I think that worked well. So I took some of the elements from those earlier drafts, and instead of using something from Ghost of Tsushima or Dredge, I went with something from Cyberpunk for a few reasons. One is the video starts with Cyberpunk. It is the first clip. It is the first thing I talk about. So you see Cyberpunk in the thumbnail, and then you see Cyberpunk in the video. That alignment works well. There is no moment of, wait, this does not match what I clicked. And that definitely was an oversight I had with the first one, because I do mention Majora's Mask, but very briefly. The video is not really about Majora's Mask. There are some clips of it used throughout, but my thought was to use Majora's Mask as a stand-in for games with timers, and that would be interesting or compelling to people. But I think it probably just was confusing, because they click it and then they don't see Majora's Mask for like 20 minutes or whatever. However, it also uses a shot from Cyberpunk that, if you're not familiar with Cyberpunk, you might not know what it is. It's just kind of a compelling city skyline that I think meshes well with the clock overlay. So it's this kind of best of both worlds, where it'll pull people in who know a lot about Cyberpunk, but just be kind of a compelling visual for those who don't. Then as far as the title, I was kind of between a few things. The original title for this video that I wanted was The Best Mechanic That Everybody Hates. And that's what I was going to go with a while back, like when I first came up with this idea a year ago. But when I searched that up, I found a video called The Best Worst Mechanic from friend of the channel, Daryl Talks Games. Now, it's not unheard of to use similar sounding titles to other people, especially when you're covering the same topic. It happens. I know people that have used the exact same title as me. I'm sure I have used the same title as other people. It is what it is, but I like to avoid it when I can. Obviously, it wouldn't be the exact same title, but it was close enough that I wanted to have a little more separation, just so people didn't necessarily confuse them, and also so that it didn't step on the toes of any SEO for Daryl, as I don't want to block Daryl from getting views if someone searches it. Also, the amount of people that already confuse Daryl and I don't know how much he gets it, but I have gotten so many people being like, I loved your video on the ending of Clair Obscur, and I'm like, that's Daryl. Daryl made the great video on the ending of Clair Obscur, not me. Maybe one day I'll make a great video on it, and I'll have to make it a title that's distinctly a little bit different than his. But I haven't made one. Anyway, so I wanted to go with something that still had that idea, but felt a little bit different. And I went with my favorite game mechanic that nobody likes, or in the thumbnail, it's my favorite mechanic that nobody likes. Obviously, it is still fairly similar, but I think there's only so much you can do about that, but it at least feels more distinct. I think it gets the same idea across, but one thing I like about it is it makes it so it's clear that I'm talking from my perspective. This is my favorite mechanic. And while I think saying best mechanic is strong in its own way, I do also think it makes people defensive in a way. And that's something I noticed early on, especially with my first thumbnail, which was just time limits are good. Actually, a lot of the comments, while respectful, were a bit defensive of why time limits weren't good. And that's fine. I expect that to a degree, but maybe it was tuned a little more than what I intended, because the point of the video is really that I'm accepting that I'm in this tiny niche of people who like this thing. So I'm not wrong, but I'm just always going to be on the outskirts of this thing. That's the whole point, is me realizing it and trying to be okay with it. So I don't really want to, I hope to convince some people to give time limits a try, but the point is not that everyone is wrong about it. And I think obviously the original thumbnail made it seem like that, and even saying best mechanics could seem like that. So I think doing it this way, especially with the contents of the video, worked well because it's rooting it in myself. And something I noticed when I switched it to this, eventually, is that this video definitely got more dislikes than my average videos do. I noticed this within the first 3 minutes of posting, which makes me assume some people, not all people, I don't want to dismiss all of it. Some people just don't like the video and that's cool. But I think some people then just came in and disliked it because they didn't like me asserting that time limits are good. So clearly that ruffled some feathers, and that's okay. That happens. But since switching it to this, the like to dislike ratio has definitely improved a decent amount, which is interesting because people are just more receptive to hearing what I'm saying when it's not me telling them that essentially they're wrong, or that's at least how they interpreted it, even though that's not what the video is about. But this is showing that maybe I'm wrong from the beginning, and then that plays out throughout the video. Anyway, I decided to A/B test this thumbnail and title against the original title and thumbnail, which we give YouTube a lot of shit for adding annoying features. This is the best thing they've added. In the past, people would just test thumbnails and titles constantly and switch things out and not know what will work and not really be able to measure it well. A/B testing has made that so much easier, made it so much less haphazard, and it's great. I'm a huge fan of it. So I A/B tested this new one versus the old one. I also had a variation of this title and thumbnail text on the Majora's Mask one to see if that did well. I A/B tested the three, and this one won by a mile. The original has, around 20% of the share, and then this is well in the 40s, and it definitely outpaced the Majora's Mask one with the same text as well. So not long after doing this A/B test, it determined that this one was the winner, and it applied it. And as soon as it applied it, the views went wild. The video had kind of settled around 100 views per hour, which I don't want to sound ungrateful for. That's a lot of views. I know a lot of people would love to have that. It is not what I normally would expect from a video I put out just a week after it came out. It is relatively low for my channel, and at that pace, it just wouldn't really hit kind of the milestones I'd want to hit. I have a floor in my mind of around where I think a video should be, and it was definitely flirting with that floor, where if it's below that point, I'd be panicked. And it was definitely flirting with that. But as soon as this went into effect, it shot up to about 600 views an hour, and then a couple thousand, and then it jumped to 3,000, and it could go higher today. I don't know. But it moved from a video that was my worst performing in the last 10, and honestly, if you look back at all the others before it, way further than that. And it turned into currently a middle of the pack video that is still climbing and could do pretty well. So why is this interesting? Why am I talking about it? It's because you can make an interesting video that people engage with, and if the title and thumbnail aren't right, then people won't watch it. They just won't click it, and then YouTube will assume people aren't interested, even when they are. And that is the annoying game of YouTube. Figuring out titles and thumbnails, and I hate playing this game. I hate the packaging side of YouTube, but it is wildly important. So my advice would be spend a lot of time thinking about the title and thumbnail of your video. Think about how someone might view it. Think about what might be interesting about it. I think what works so well about this current one, partly what I mentioned before, Cyberpunk's in the thumbnail, Cyberpunk's the first thing that comes up. You get that interaction. It is not judgmental in what it's talking about. It also doesn't specifically say time limits. I kind of get the sense that people have their mind made up about time limits or think they do, and when they see it, they're just less interested in clicking something about it, especially when it might seem like the person or the video that they're looking at might be judgmental and rude, which of course is not what my video is, but they might think it is because they don't know me, or they think they know me as something that I'm not. I don't know. This one provides a sense of mystery. You don't know what my favorite game mechanic is. As you'll notice the clock, you'll assume it probably has something to do about time, but you don't know for sure. So there's a little bit of that hook of like, I wonder what his favorite game mechanic is. And even if you make that jump that it's about time limits, you're like, wait, that's his favorite mechanic? That's weird. even though I thought the other one would be good, it's worked before for me. This one ended up being a much better fit in terms of drawing people in. But yeah, you just always have to consider what something might mean to the people watching. And that's hard. It's hard to get in the head of other people. Currently with the A/B testing in YouTube, if you have the ability, I think thumbnail A/B testing is available for everyone. I don't know that title is yet. They might be rolling it out, but experiment with that stuff. And also, I think if you're looking for something to get a return on views, it's not a guarantee, obviously, but getting someone to do your thumbnails, if it's not a skill that you have established yet, might be good. I think if you're going to spend money on something, that's probably a good thing to spend money on. Reach out to Hot Cider. I'm sure there are other people too, but reach out to Hot Cider. He is very good to work with. He's great at bringing visions to life. Of course, it is good to build the skill yourself. If you don't have the skill yet, it might be good to bounce ideas off someone who does so that you can slowly learn things and learn what works and what makes the most sense for what you can do. I know sometimes it's also easy to get stuck on certain titles or thumbnails because you're like, well, this is what I would click. And that's fair. And depending on your goals, you should do what is most creatively fulfilling to you. I'd say if one of your goals is to get your work out there and seen by as many people as possible, you do have to think about how might other people view this? How might 5 other people? You could even ask friends who, I would say maybe if you're in the video making space, ask a couple of those friends, but also ask friends who are outside of the video making space, who maybe watch similar videos to this, or maybe who even don't, and just ask like, what would you click? What interests you about these, to try to get a sense of how people feel. I would, of course, warn against getting completely stuck on one video. I think you should try, if something's not working, to see if you can get it to work. But at a point, it is going to be best to just move on to the next thing. But yeah, it is worth it to give it a shot. Don't just give up on something because it's not immediately resonating. Yeah, hopefully there was something interesting or helpful in all of that. This has been an interesting video to make. I've been back and forth on a lot of things about it. And I'm happy with the spot it's at. And I think it's now in the best place it's been. And it's nice to have this thing that I thought was kind of going to be, I don't want to say a failure, but definitely an underperformer, which is never fun. It's never fun to jump into the next project after having the last one do a lot worse than you expected. So it's nice to have that transition. I do still have regrets about creative choices I made with this video. For instance, I cut a section I had about multiplayer that I was so focused on the single player. So I cut the multiplayer section because it didn't add to what I thought was the central conversation. But I do think in hindsight, especially with certain comments I've gotten, that it probably would have been good to mention multiplayer and how people don't have a problem with timers in multiplayer games the way they do in single player games, and kind of explain some of the reasons why and maybe some of like the psychology behind that. Also, I didn't really talk about fail states in these games and how that can be a massive barrier, especially for a big game. If you play for 50 hours and then fail, are you just supposed to play it again? I do think there are solutions to that, and I am actually working on another main channel video that will address that topic, so I don't want to get into it too much. But I think there are solutions to that. As the video is about me accepting that people don't like it, I didn't want to litigate every single time limit aspect and mechanic and how it works and how it could work and how it could be good, because I didn't think that was really the point. However, I do think I could have shown some of the ways it could be implemented and then expressed how even with those, I don't think it would change people's minds just because of the pressure of it. And part of it is that you want there to be that stress. Like, it doesn't work if you know it's just going to be okay. So even if there are systems to protect players from actually having to restart, if you know too much of that, then it loses power. So it's this push and pull. Anyway, yeah, I'll get into that more in a different video. Hopefully you learned something about video, not making. Don't really talk about the making. This is really just thumbnail and title making. But hopefully you learned something about publishing a video and found this mildly interesting. Okay, bye.